The thunderclap shattered the desert stillness as Catherine Blackwood stood frozen on her porch. Staring down the barrel of the revolver, she aimed at the dusty stranger who'd appeared at her homestead. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes remained fierce as raindrops began to pelt the dry earth around them. "State your business or start walking," she commanded, her voice cutting through the rumble of the approaching storm. "I don't take kindly to uninvited guests." The man raised his hands slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Despite the revolver pointed at his chest, a gentle smile crossed his features. "Name's Ryder Hayes, madam," he said, his voice low and respectful. "I was hired by your father to deliver a package." He gestured carefully toward his saddlebag. "Been riding 3 days from Tucson to find you." Catherine didn't lower her gun. "My father's been dead for 2 years." "Yes, madam, I know. But before he passed, he left something with my employer, Mr. Holloway at the First National Bank. Said it was to be delivered to you on this very date. April 12, 1875. The date hit Catherine like a physical blow. Today would have been her father's 70th birthday. The gun wavered in her hand. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Ryder reached slowly into his vest pocket and produced an envelope sealed with wax. "This letter from Mr. Holloway should explain everything. You're welcome to read it before accepting the package." Catherine hesitated, then gestured with the gun barrel. "Toss it here." He complied, and she caught it with her free hand, noting the official bank seal in the wax. Still keeping the gun trained on him, she broke the seal with her thumb and quickly scanned the contents. The handwriting was indeed Mr. Holloway's. She recognized it from her father's business correspondence. The clouds opened up then, rain falling in earnest. Catherine glanced at the darkening sky, then back at the stranger rider standing patiently in the downpour, water streaming from the brim of his hat. "You'd better come inside," she said finally, lowering the gun. "At least until the storm passes." Relief flashed across his face. "Much obliged, madam." Catherine stepped back, allowing him to enter her small cabin. She watched warily as he removed his hat and duster, hanging them by the door. Water dripped onto her wooden floor, forming small puddles. "The package," she prompted, setting her revolver on the table but keeping it within reach. Ryder nodded and returned to his saddlebag, producing a small wooden box secured with a simple brass latch. He placed it carefully on the table between them. "Your father paid for 5 years of safekeeping at the bank, with instructions for delivery today. Mr. Holloway hired me 3 weeks ago to make sure it reached you." Catherine stared at the box, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Why you?" Ryder shrugged. "I've done courier work for the bank before. Trustworthy reputation, I suppose." He paused. "And I knew your father briefly. Worked on his cattle drive to Abilene back in '68. Her eyes shot up to his face. "You knew my father?" "Yes, madam. He was a good man, fair boss. Spoke of his daughter often, how proud he was of your spirit." Catherine turned away, unwilling to let this stranger see the tears that threatened. She busied herself with stoking the fire in the small stone hearth. "You must be hungry after your journey. I can offer you some stew and coffee while the storm passes." "That's mighty kind, thank you." They ate in relative silence, the rain pounding on the roof above them. Catherine found herself studying him when he wasn't looking the way his hands cradled the coffee cup. The quiet strength in his posture, the respectful way he kept his eyes averted most of the time. He wasn't what she'd expected from a cowboy courier. As they finished the meal, Catherine finally reached for the box. Her fingers trembled slightly as she undid the latch. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay her mother's gold locket, the one her father had always kept in his desk drawer, along with a folded letter in her father's unmistakable handwriting. She read it silently, tears finally spilling over. Her father's words reached out across time and death, reminding her that she was never truly alone, that the love of those who had gone before remained with her always. The locket contained miniature portraits of both her parents, painted in happier times. "He wanted you to have something to remember them by," Ryder said softly. "He told me that much, at least." Catherine closed her hand around the locket. Thank you for bringing this to me, Ryder nodded, rising from the table. I should be on my way once the rain lets up. Where will you go? Nowhere particular. I've been drifting since the war ended. He looked toward the window where rain still fell in sheets. Though I might stay in these parts a while, heard the Double C Ranch is hiring hands for the spring roundup. That's Jacob Carson's spread, 10 miles west of here. Catherine hesitated. He's a decent man to work for. The storm continued well into the evening, and despite her initial wariness, Catherine found herself offering Ryder the small lean to beside the barn for the night. He accepted gratefully, and she watched from her window as he made his way through the rain to settle his horse. Later, as she prepared for bed, Catherine held the locket to her heart, thinking of her father's final gift and the unexpected courier who had delivered it. She wondered if she would see Ryder Hayes again after he rode out in the morning. Dawn broke clear and golden over the mountains, the storm having washed the desert air clean. Catherine rose early, as was her habit, and was surprised to find coffee already brewing when she entered her kitchen. Ryder stood by the stove, looking somewhat uncertain. "Hope you don't mind, madam. Thought I'd repay your hospitality before I headed out." "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup he offered. "Will you be trying the Double C today?" "Thought I might." He paused. "Your place looks like it could use some repair after that storm. Noticed your barn roof has some damage and that corral fence won't hold your livestock for long." Catherine bristled slightly. "I manage just fine, Mr. Hayes." "No doubt you do, madam. Just making an observation." He finished his coffee in a single swallow. "I could take a look at that roof before I go if you'd permit it." She wanted to refuse, to insist she needed no help from a drifting cowboy. But the truth was, she'd been struggling to maintain the homestead alone since her father's death. Pride warred with practicality. "I can pay you a fair wage," she said finally. Something like hurt flashed in his eyes. "Not asking for payment, Miss Blackwood, just offering a helping hand in return for your shelter." Catherine felt a twinge of shame at her assumption. "I apologize. If you're willing, I'd appreciate the help." He nodded and headed outside without another word. Catherine watched through the window as he examined the barn roof, moving with confident efficiency. She finished her coffee and went to join him, determined to work alongside him rather than accept charity. They spent the morning repairing the storm damage together. Catherine was surprised by Ryder's skill and his willingness to listen when she explained how she wanted things done. There was no condescension in his manner, no assumption that he knew better because he was a man. By midday, the barn roof was patched, and they'd made good progress on the corral fence. As they paused to eat a simple lunch of bread and dried meat, Catherine found herself curious about the man who had delivered her father's final gift. "You said you fought in the war," she asked. Ryder nodded, his expression growing distant. "Confederate cavalry. Joined up in '63, fought till Appomattox, and after, drifted west like many others. Tried my hand at different things: cattle drives, mining, some scouting for the army." He shrugged. "Nothing seemed to stick. What brought you to courier work?" "Chance, mostly. Was in the right place when Mr. Holloway needed someone trustworthy." His eyes met hers. "And I remembered your father from that cattle drive. When I heard his name, it seemed right somehow." Catherine studied him, sensing there was more to his story than he was telling, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West carried secrets and sorrows. It wasn't her place to demand his. "I should finish that fence before sundown," Ryder said, rising to his feet. "If I'm to reach the Double C by tomorrow." "Of course." Catherine stood as well, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "I'll help you." They worked side by side through the afternoon, and Catherine found herself admiring not just his strength but his attention to detail. He built things to last, not just to appear fixed. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in gold and crimson, they completed the last section of fence. Ryder stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "That should hold through the next storm," he said with quiet satisfaction. "Thank you," Catherine replied, truly grateful. "You've done more than deliver a package today." He nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I should see to my horse if I'm to leave at first light." "You're welcome to stay another night," Catherine found herself saying. "The lean-to isn't much, but it's shelter." Ryder studied her face for a moment. "I don't want to impose." It's not an imposition, she hesitated. I could use help with the well pump tomorrow if you're willing. It's been sticking since last month. Something like pleasure flickered in his eyes. I'd be happy to take a look at it before I go. That evening, Catherine cooked a proper meal to thank him rabbit stew with the last of her preserved vegetables. They ate together on her small porch, watching the stars appear in the vast desert sky. The conversation came more easily now, and Catherine found herself sharing stories of growing up on the homestead with her father after her mother's death from fever. He taught me everything: how to shoot, ride, mend fence, birth calves, she said. Some thought it improper, a girl learning such things, but he said life out here required practical skills, not social graces. Ryder smiled. He was right about that, though you seem to have mastered both. Catherine felt a warmth rise to her cheeks at the compliment. Hardly. The closest neighbor is 5 miles away, and I get to town perhaps once a month. I've had little practice with social graces. Yet you took in a stranger during a storm and fed him twice. Seems gracious to me. Only after pointing a gun at you, she reminded him with a small smile. Prudent, not ungracious, he countered. A woman alone should be cautious. They fell silent, the desert night sounds filling the space between them. Catherine found herself reluctant for the evening to end, though she couldn't quite explain why. There was something about Ryder Hayes that put her at ease, a quiet strength that asked nothing of her yet offered support freely. I should turn in, she said finally. Dawn comes early. Ryder rose immediately. Thank you for the meal, Miss Blackwood. It was the finest I've had in months. Catherine, she said impulsively, if you're staying another day, you might as well use my given name. He inclined his head. Catherine, then, and I'm Ryder to my friends. Good night, Ryder. Good night, Catherine. She watched from her doorway as he crossed the yard to the lean-to, his figure silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Only when he disappeared inside did she close her door, wondering at the strange sense of anticipation she felt about the morning to come. The next day passed much like the first, with Ryder repairing the well pump and Catherine working alongside him. They fell into an easy rhythm, and she found herself laughing more than she had in years at his dry observations and occasional stories of his travels. By late afternoon, the homestead was in better repair than it had been in months. Catherine surveyed their work with satisfaction as they shared a dipper of cold water from the now smoothly functioning pump. I can't thank you enough, she said. This would have taken me weeks on my own. Ryder's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Happy to help, though I should be on my way soon if I'm to reach town before dark. Catherine felt an unexpected pang at his words. Of course, the Double C will be looking for experienced hands. He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. I was thinking I might stay in these parts a while. Would it be all right if I stopped by now and then, to check on the repairs, make sure everything's holding up? Catherine studied his face, sensing there was more to the request than mere concern for his handiwork. The thought both alarmed and pleased her. I'd like that, she said simply. He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. I'll be back in a week or so then, if that suits you. It does. After Ryder rode out, Catherine found herself standing on her porch longer than necessary, watching the horizon where he had disappeared. The homestead felt strangely empty without his presence, though she'd lived alone for 2 years. She touched the locket at her throat, her father's final gift, delivered by a man who seemed to have stepped into her life at precisely the moment she needed him, though she hadn't known it. True to his word, Ryder returned 8 days later. Catherine spotted him approaching from the east, his horse moving at an unhurried pace. She was ashamed at how her heart quickened at the sight of him, at how she smoothed her hair and apron before stepping onto the porch to greet him. Miss Blackwood, he called, lifting his hat. Mr. Hayes, she returned, then smiled. Catherine and Ryder, remember, he returned the smile, dismounting smoothly. Catherine, how have the repairs held up? Not a single leak in the barn roof despite yesterday's shower, and the pump works better than it has in years. Glad to hear it. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Brought you something from town. Catherine accepted it with surprise. You shouldn't have. It's nothing fancy, just thought you might have use for it. She unwrapped the package to find a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Catherine ran her fingers over the leather binding, touched beyond words. "How did you know I like to read?" Ryder looked slightly embarrassed. "Noticed your bookshelf that first day. Seemed well used." "The shopkeeper recommended this one." Catherine felt a lump forming in her throat. It had been so long since anyone had given her a gift simply for the pleasure of it. "Thank you, I shall treasure it," he nodded, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I've taken a job at the Double C, Mr. Carson was hiring for the spring roundup, like you said." "That's wonderful. Jacob Carson runs a good operation. It's temporary work, but steady for the next month or so." He glanced around the homestead. "Thought maybe I could come by on my days off." "Your chicken coop could use some reinforcing before summer." Catherine smiled at his transparent excuse. "I'd welcome the help, and the company." And so began a pattern that would extend through the spring and into summer. Every week or so, Ryder would ride up to the homestead on his day off from the Double C. Each time, he would bring some small gift coffee beans from the mercantile, a new hammer to replace her broken one, seeds for her garden. And each time, he would find some task that needed doing around the property. They would work together through the day, sharing meals and conversation. Catherine learned that Ryder had grown up in Tennessee, the son of a blacksmith, and had never expected to find himself in the Arizona territory. He spoke little of the war, but she gathered it had left wounds that went deeper than the scar on his left forearm. In turn, she told him of her mother's death when she was 12, of her father's determination to make their homestead succeed despite drought and difficulties, of her dreams of someday expanding their small herd of cattle into a proper ranch. "You could do it," Ryder said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "You've got the skills and the determination." "And no capital," Catherine said practically. "It takes money to build a herd. Start small, 1 or 2 calves at a time, perhaps." She glanced at him. "Do you ever think of settling somewhere, having a place of your own?" A shadow crossed his face. "Used to dream of it after the war, seemed less possible somehow." "Why?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Lost my taste for dreams when I lost my brother at Gettysburg." "He was the one with all the plans, farm in the West, wife, children. I was just following his lead." Catherine touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry, been a long time now." He covered her hand with his own briefly, then stood. "Getting late, I should head back to the bunkhouse." Catherine wanted to ask him to stay, but the words caught in her throat. Whatever was growing between them felt too fragile yet for such boldness. "Will I see you next week?" she asked instead. "Count on it." As spring ripened into summer, Catherine found herself counting the days between Ryder's visits. Her heart would leap at the sight of him riding toward the homestead, and the hours they spent together seemed to pass in moments. She began to wonder if what she was feeling was more than gratitude and friendship. On a scorching day in late June, they worked together to repair the irrigation channel that brought water to her small vegetable garden. The sun beat down mercilessly, and by midday, they were both soaked with sweat. "We should rest until it cools a bit," Catherine suggested, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "I've made lemonade." They retreated to the shade of her porch, sipping the cool drink gratefully. Ryder had removed his shirt while working, and Catherine found her eyes drawn to the lean strength of his shoulders and back, to the way the muscles moved beneath his sun-bronzed skin. She looked away quickly when he caught her gaze, heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. "The roundup ends next week," Ryder said after a moment. "Mr. Carson's keeping some hands on, but most of us will be moving on." Catherine's heart sank. "Will you be staying?" He looked at her directly, his eyes serious. "Depends. On what? On whether there's reason to stay." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Catherine set down her glass carefully. "I would miss your visits if you left," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryder moved closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek gently. "Catherine!" The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both start. Ryder dropped his hand and moved away just as a rider came into view. Jacob Carson himself, owner of the Double C. "Miss Blackwood," Carson called, touching his hat as he rode up. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Carson." Catherine replied, rising to greet him. What brings you out this way? Carson dismounted, nodding to Ryder. Hayes, didn't expect to find you here. Just helping Miss Blackwood with some repairs, sir, Ryder said, his voice carefully neutral. Carson's eyes moved between them, and Catherine had the uncomfortable feeling he was drawing conclusions. He was a decent employer, but also a notorious gossip. What can I do for you, Mr. Carson? She prompted. Just passing through on my way back from town, he said. Thought I'd check if you'd be interested in selling that north section of your property. It borders my range, and I could use the extra grazing land. Catherine stiffened. Carson had made this offer before, and she'd refused. That land contained the best water source on her property. My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Carson. The land isn't for sale. Carson's expression hardened slightly. You're sitting on good ranch land, Miss Blackwood, but you haven't got the means to work it properly. Been 2 years since your daddy passed, and you're still just scraping by with those few head of cattle. Nevertheless, it's my land, and I intend to keep it, Carson shrugged. Can't blame a man for trying. Offer stands if you change your mind. He glanced at Ryder again. Roundup crews heading out at dawn for the North Range. You're expected. Yes, sir, Ryder said. I'll be there. After Carson rode off, a strained silence fell between them. The easy intimacy of moments before had vanished. I should go, Ryder said finally. Early start tomorrow. Catherine wanted to ask him to stay, to return to the moment before Carson's interruption, but pride stopped her. Of course, thank you for your help today. He hesitated, then stepped closer, taking her hand in his. I meant what I said, Catherine. I'll be back when the roundup ends if you want me to be. She looked up at him, at the earnest expression in his eyes. I do want that. He smiled then, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth coursing through her. Then count on it. The week that followed was the longest of Catherine's life. She threw herself into work around the homestead, trying not to count the days until the roundup ended, trying not to hope too much. On the 8th day, as she was hanging laundry to dry in the hot July sun, she spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. Her heart leapt, thinking it was Ryder returning as promised. But as the riders drew closer, she realized with dismay that it was 3 men she didn't recognize. Catherine hurried inside for her revolver, then returned to the porch to await their arrival. Something about their approach set her nerves on edge. They rode too fast, too recklessly, without the respect a visitor should show when approaching someone's home. Afternoon, madam, the leader called as they reined in before her porch. He was a hard-faced man with cold eyes. This the Blackwood place? It is, Catherine answered, keeping her hand near her hidden revolver. What's your business here? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Name's Silas Dawson. These are my brothers, Illy and Frank. We're looking for work in these parts. I don't need any hands, Catherine said firmly. The Double C might be hiring 10 miles west of here. Been there already, Dawson said. They weren't hospitable. Thought we'd try our luck with a lady rancher instead. Something in his tone made Catherine's skin crawl. As I said, I don't need help. Good day to you. Dawson didn't move. That's mighty unfriendly, madam. We've ridden a long way. Least you could do is offer some water for our horses. Catherine hesitated. Refusing water to travelers and their mounts was against the unwritten code of the West. You can water your horses at the trough by the barn, then I'll thank you to move on. The men exchanged glances, and Catherine's unease grew. As they led their horses toward the water trough, she noticed them looking around the homestead, assessing it with calculating eyes. Nice little spread you've got, Dawson commented. You run it all by yourself, I manage, Catherine said shortly. She kept her distance as they watered their horses, her hand never straying far from her hidden weapon. Must be hard for a woman alone, Dawson continued, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her want to scrub her skin clean. Dangerous, too, all sorts of unsavory characters in these parts. I'm quite capable of taking care of myself, Mr. Dawson. He smiled again, that cold smile that didn't touch his eyes. I can see that. Still, it's no life for a pretty woman. You ought to have a man around. Before Catherine could reply, another rider appeared in the distance. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Ryder's distinctive silhouette. The Dawson brothers noticed her reaction and turned to see who approached. Ryder rode up at a steady pace, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. "Afternoon, Catherine," he said, dismounting smoothly. "These gentlemen friends of yours?" "They were just leaving," she replied, grateful for his timely arrival. Dawson's eyes narrowed as he studied Ryder. "Don't recall saying we were leaving. We're still considering the ladies' hospitality." Ryder stepped closer to Catherine, his stance casual but alert. "Miss Blackwood's hospitality is her own to give or withhold, and she's asked you to move on." Tension crackled in the air as the men assessed each other. Catherine could see the younger Dawson brothers fingering their revolvers, eager for trouble. "3 against 1, mister," Dawson said softly. "You might want to reconsider your position." "Silas Dawson," Ryder said, recognition dawning in his voice. "Thought you looked familiar." "You boys are wanted in 3 territories. Horse theft in Colorado, bank robbery in New Mexico." Dawson's hand moved toward his gun. "You've got the wrong men, friend." "I don't think so." Ryder's voice remained calm, but Catherine could sense the steel beneath it. "I did some scouting for the U.S. Marshals last year. Got a good look at the wanted posters, memory for faces." The younger brothers looked to Silas nervously. He hesitated, his eyes calculating. "You're outnumbered," he said again. Catherine chose that moment to produce her revolver. "Not exactly," she said steadily. For a tense moment, Catherine thought violence was inevitable. Then Dawson relaxed, hands moving away from his weapon. "No need for trouble," he said smoothly. "We'll be on our way, just looking for honest work." "Try somewhere else," Ryder suggested. "And keep riding until you're clear of this county." The Dawson brothers mounted up, Silas's eyes lingering on Catherine with a promise of future retribution that made her blood run cold. "We'll meet again, madam." "For your sake, I hope not," Ryder replied. They watched in silence as the Dawsons rode away, making sure they truly left rather than circling back. Only when they were out of sight did Catherine lower her revolver, her hands trembling slightly with the aftermath of fear and tension. "Are you all right?" Ryder asked, turning to her with concern. She nodded. "Thanks to your timing. How did you know to come?" "I didn't. The roundup finished early and He hesitated. "I couldn't wait to see you." The simple honesty of his words warmed her through. "I'm glad. Those men are trouble, Catherine." "Real trouble. The Dawsons have left a trail of violence across the territories." "Do you think they'll come back?" Ryder's expression grew serious. "Eventually. Men like that don't take kindly to being turned away, and they've seen your place now, seen that you're alone." "I've managed on my own for 2 years," Catherine said, a touch of defensiveness in her voice. "I know. You're the strongest woman I've ever met." He touched her cheek gently. "But even the strongest need help sometimes." She leaned into his touch, the events of the afternoon having stripped away her usual reserve. "Stay for supper. I've got a stew simmering." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "I'd like that." As they moved toward the house, Ryder kept glancing back toward where the Dawsons had disappeared. "You're worried," Catherine observed, "just cautious. Mind if I check around the property before dark? Make sure they didn't leave anyone behind." Catherine nodded, appreciating his thoroughness. While Ryder walked the perimeter of her land, she put final touches on the stew and set the table. A strange domestic happiness filled her at the thought of sharing her evening meal with him, not as a visitor passing through, but as someone who might be becoming more. When he returned, satisfied that no immediate threat lurked, they ate together in a companionable ease that felt both new and somehow familiar. Catherine found herself watching his hands, remembering how they had touched her cheek with such gentleness. "The Double C roundup is finished," Ryder said as they cleared the dishes together. "Mr. Carson offered me a permanent position." Catherine's heart quickened. "Did you accept?" "Told him I needed to think it over." His eyes met hers. "Depends on whether there's reason to stay in these parts." The air between them grew charged with possibility. Catherine took a steadying breath. "And is there reason to stay?" Ryder moved closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek as it had on the porch the week before. "I think you know there is, Catherine." Her eyes met his, seeing the question there. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. I've been wanting to do that since the day I fixed your well pump, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine smiled up at him. What took you so long, cowboy? He laughed softly, then kissed her again, more deeply this time. Catherine responded with a fervor that surprised them both, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. I should go. It's getting late. Catherine nodded reluctantly. Will you come back tomorrow? Try and stop me. He kissed her once more briefly, then forced himself to step away. Lock your door after I leave and keep that revolver handy. You're still worried about the Dawsons. Just being cautious. Men like that carry grudges. After Ryder left, Catherine stood on her porch watching him ride toward town, her fingers touching her lips where his kiss still lingered. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just survival and solitude, a future that included Ryder Hayes. The next few weeks passed in a sweet haze of work and discovery. Ryder continued his job at the Double C but spent every free moment at Catherine's homestead. Together, they mended fences, repaired outbuildings, and tended her small herd of cattle. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch and talk about everything and nothing, sometimes reading aloud from the book of poetry he had given her. Their kisses grew more frequent, more passionate, though both maintained a careful restraint, aware of the boundaries propriety demanded. Catherine found herself falling in love with Ryder's quiet strength, his gentle humor, his unfailing respect for her independence even as he supported her dreams. On a warm August evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Ryder turned to her with unusual seriousness. I've been thinking about the future, Catherine. Her heart quickened. Have you? He took her hand in his. I never expected to find someone like you. Never thought I'd want to put down roots again after the war, but these past months, being with you has changed everything. Catherine squeezed his hand. For me too. I want to build something here with you. A life, a ranch, a family if you want that. His eyes searched hers. I know it's soon, maybe too soon. Catherine silenced him with a kiss. It's not too soon, not when it feels this right. Ryder's face lit with joy and he pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. I should speak to Reverend Taylor in town, he said. Do this properly. Catherine laughed softly. You're a traditional man, Ryder Hayes, only about some things. His smile turned mischievous. About others, I'm open to suggestion. Heat bloomed in Catherine's cheeks at his implication. Perhaps we should discuss those. Suggestions after a visit to the Reverend. Their plans for the future, however, were interrupted the very next day. Catherine was in her vegetable garden when she heard the sound of approaching riders. Looking up, she felt cold dread wash over her at the sight of the Dawson brothers returning, and this time, there were 5 of them. She dropped her gardening tools and ran for the house, reaching for her revolver just as they rode into the yard. Silas Dawson smiled coldly when he saw her. Told you we'd meet again, madam, he called. Been watching your place. Noticed your protector isn't around today. Catherine raised her revolver. State your business and then leave, Mr. Dawson. Our business. He dismounted slowly, his brothers and the 2 new men following suit. Well, you see, we've taken a liking to your little spread here. Good water, decent grazing land. Thought we might just take possession. This is my land, Catherine said firmly, though fear clutched at her heart. I suggest you leave while you still can, Dawson laughed. And who's going to make us? You, 1 woman against 5 men. His expression hardened. We could just kill you and be done with it, but I'm a sporting man. I'll give you a choice: leave now with the clothes on your back or stay and face the consequences. Catherine's mind raced. Ryder wouldn't be coming until evening. He was working the far range today. No neighbors close enough to hear gunshots. She was truly alone against these 5 hardened criminals. But this was her home, her father's legacy. She would not abandon it. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. And neither is my revolver. Dawson's face twisted with anger. Have it your way, he gestured to his men. Take her and burn the house. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the men advanced, Catherine fired, hitting one in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry of pain. She aimed at another, but before she could fire again, Silas rushed her, knocking the gun from her hand. Catherine fought with every ounce of strength she possessed, kicking, scratching, biting. She managed to break free momentarily and ran for the barn, hoping to reach the rifle she kept there. A gunshot rang out, and Catherine felt a burning pain across her upper arm. She stumbled but kept running as blood soaked her sleeve. She reached the barn and slammed the door behind her, frantically searching for the rifle. Outside, she could hear the Dawsons arguing about whether to burn her out or break down the door. She found the rifle and checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself behind a stack of hay bales, aiming at the door. When it burst open, she fired without hesitation, hitting one of the younger Dawson brothers in the leg. He fell with a howl of pain, and the others retreated temporarily. "You're just making it worse for yourself, woman," Silas shouted. "We'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." Catherine tried to stem the bleeding from her arm while keeping the rifle trained on the door. She knew she couldn't hold them off indefinitely. Her only hope was to survive until Ryder came looking for her. The smell of smoke reached her nostrils. They had set fire to the outside of the barn. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as she realized she would soon be forced to choose between burning or facing their guns. Then, miraculously, she heard more gunfire but from a different direction. Shouts of confusion from the Dawsons, followed by the unmistakable sound of Ryder's voice. "Drop your weapons. Now." Relief made Catherine light-headed. She stumbled to the barn door and peered through a crack to see Ryder, along with 3 riders she recognized as hands from the Double C, confronting the Dawsons with leveled rifles. "Catherine," Ryder called. "Are you in there?" "I'm here," she shouted back. "They've set fire to the barn." "Come out. We've got them covered." Catherine pushed open the door, rifle still in hand, and emerged through the growing smoke. The scene before her was tense. Ryder and the ranch hands had the Dawsons at gunpoint, but neither side was backing down. "You're outnumbered now, Dawson," Ryder said coldly. "Drop your weapons." Silas Dawson's eyes flicked from Ryder to Catherine, calculation and hatred warring in his expression. "This isn't over," he spat. "It is for you," came another voice. Catherine turned to see Jacob Carson himself riding up with 2 more of his men. "Silas Dawson, you boys have been trouble since you crossed into this territory." With Carson's arrival, the Dawsons were finally outmatched. They surrendered their weapons reluctantly, fury etched on their faces as they were disarmed and bound. "The sheriff will be mighty pleased to see you," Carson said. "There's a substantial reward for your capture." Only when the Dawsons were securely tied did Ryder rush to Catherine's side. His face paled at the sight of blood on her sleeve. "You're hurt," he said, gently examining the wound. "It's just a graze," she assured him, though the pain was considerable. "How did you know to come?" "Wasn't chance this time," Ryder said grimly. "I've been worried about the Dawsons returning. Asked some of the boys from the Double C to keep an eye out when I couldn't be here." He looked toward Carson. "Thank you for coming, sir," Carson nodded. "No decent rancher wants scum like the Dawsons in our territory. Besides," he added with a knowing look, "couldn't let anything happen to your lady, could we?" Catherine leaned against Ryder, suddenly exhausted as reaction set in. "The barn, we'll put out the fire," one of the ranch hands assured her. "Doesn't look too bad yet." While Carson's men dealt with the Dawsons and the barn fire, Ryder took Catherine inside to tend her wound. His hands were gentle as he cleaned and bandaged her arm, but his eyes were troubled. "I nearly lost you today," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But you didn't," Catherine replied. "You came when I needed you most. I should have been here. Should have known they'd come back when I wasn't around." Catherine touched his face, forcing him to look at her. "You can't be everywhere, Ryder, and I'm not helpless. I held them off." Pride flickered in his eyes. "Yes, you did." "My brave Catherine." He kissed her then, a desperate kiss full of relief and lingering fear. She responded with equal fervor, the day's danger making them both acutely aware of how precious their time together was. When Carson returned to inform them that the Dawsons were secured and the fire extinguished, he found them still in each other's arms. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sheriff's been sent for," he announced. "Should be here by nightfall to take those varmints to jail." He hesitated. Miss Blackwood, after today, you might want to reconsider my offer for that north section. Enough money to move somewhere safer. Before Catherine could respond, Ryder spoke. She's not selling, Mr. Carson, and she won't be alone anymore. Carson's eyebrows rose. That's so. Catherine smiled up at Ryder. That's so. In fact, we were just discussing a visit to Reverend Taylor. Understanding dawned on Carson's weathered face. Well, I'll be congratulations to you both then. He touched his hat. We'll be taking the Dawsons to meet the sheriff. Hayes, you're excused from duties for the next few days. Reckon Miss Blackwood could use your presence here. After Carson and his men departed with their prisoners, Catherine and Ryder stood on her porch, surveying the homestead. The barn would need repairs, but the damage was minimal thanks to the quick response of Carson's men. Not exactly how I planned to propose, Ryder said ruefully, his arm around her waist. Catherine laughed softly. When has anything between us gone according to plan? He turned to face her, suddenly serious. I meant what I said to Carson. You won't be alone anymore, Catherine. If you'll have me, I want to build a life here with you. Turn this homestead into the ranch your father dreamed of. Nothing would make me happier, she replied. But are you sure? This isn't the easiest life. I've never been more sure of anything. He took her hands in his. Catherine Blackwood, will you marry me? Let me love you and work beside you for the rest of our days. Tears of joy filled Catherine's eyes. Yes, Ryder Hayes, yes, with all my heart. 2 weeks later, they stood before Reverend Taylor in the small church in town, exchanging vows witnessed by Jacob Carson and a few hands from the Double C. Catherine wore her mother's dress, lovingly preserved all these years, and her father's locket around her neck. Ryder wore a new suit, looking both uncomfortable and proudly handsome. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Taylor declared. You may kiss your bride. Ryder's kiss was gentle yet full of promise. As they turned to face the small gathering as husband and wife, Catherine felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find after her father's death. The Dawsons were safely in territorial prison awaiting trial. Their threat ended. The homestead was secure, and with Ryder by her side, Catherine knew they could build the ranch her father had envisioned. Life in the Arizona Territory was never easy, but it was infinitely better shared with someone who understood both her strength and her vulnerability, who respected her independence even as he offered his support. As they rode back to the homestead, their home now, Catherine looked at her husband with wonder and love. "What are you thinking?" Ryder asked, catching her gaze. "I'm thinking how fortunate I am that my father chose you to deliver his package." Ryder smiled, that warm smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "I think he knew what he was doing, entrusting you to me, though I suspect he'd be amused to know how long I had to wait for you to let me in." "You didn't wait that long," Catherine protested with a laugh. "Felt like forever," he replied, reaching across to take her hand. "But you were worth the wait, Catherine Hayes, worth every minute." The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, and occasional hardship, as was the way of life on the frontier. Catherine and Ryder expanded the homestead into a modest but successful cattle ranch, working side by side through drought and prosperity alike. When their first child was born, a daughter they named Emma, after Catherine's mother Ryder fashioned a cradle from the wood of an old oak tree that had fallen on their property. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, named James after Catherine's father. As the children grew, so did the ranch. The Double C remained their closest neighbor, though relations with Jacob Carson warmed considerably after Ryder helped him fight off rustlers that threatened both their herds. Eventually, Carson gave up trying to buy their north section and instead proposed a partnership for grazing rights that benefited both ranches. On cool evenings, after the children were asleep, Catherine and Ryder would often sit on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. Sometimes they would read poetry aloud or simply sit in companionable silence, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked one such evening, 10 years into their marriage. "Settling here with me instead of continuing to roam?" Ryder looked at her with the same warmth in his eyes that had been there from the beginning. "Not for a single moment. Everything I need is right here." Catherine leaned up to kiss him, marveling that after all this time, his touch still made her heart race. Who would have thought that a package delivery would lead to this? I knew the moment I saw you standing on this porch with a revolver pointed at my chest, Ryder said with a chuckle. Knew you were the one I'd been looking for without realizing it. Is that why you were so determined to fix everything on the homestead, to win my heart? Partly. His expression grew thoughtful, but mostly because I saw how much you loved this place, how hard you worked to keep it. I wanted to help you hold on to what mattered to you. Catherine touched the locket at her throat, her father's final gift, delivered by the man who would become her husband. You gave me back more than this homestead, Ryder. You gave me a future when I thought I'd just be surviving day to day forever. Inside the house, their daughter called out in her sleep. Ryder squeezed Catherine's hand before rising to check on the children. She watched him go, filled with gratitude for the life they had built together. From that first day, when he'd appeared with her father's package, through every challenge and joy that followed, Ryder Hayes had proven himself a man worth opening her door to and her heart. The patience he had shown waiting for her to trust him, to love him, had blossomed into a lifetime of devotion that neither of them had imagined possible. As the years continued to pass, their ranch prospered and their family grew. Emma and James were joined by a younger sister, Sarah, who arrived unexpectedly when Catherine was 40, a surprise blessing that brought new joy to their household. The children grew up strong and capable, learning the ways of ranch life from both parents, inheriting Catherine's determination and Ryder's steady patience. By the time they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, the Hayes Ranch had become one of the most respected in the territory. What had begun as Catherine's struggling homestead was now a thriving operation with a substantial herd and several hired hands. Ryder, once a drifting cowboy with no fixed destination, had become a respected rancher whose word was trusted throughout the county. On the evening of their anniversary, after a celebration attended by neighbors and friends, Ryder took Catherine's hand and led her to the spot where they had first met, her porch, where she had once greeted him with suspicion and a loaded revolver. Remember? He asked, his hair now silver at the temples but his eyes still bright with love. How could I forget? Catherine replied, touching his weathered cheek. You were soaked from the rain, trying to convince a stubborn woman to accept a package. Best delivery I ever made, Ryder said, pulling her close. Though I had no idea where it would lead. Didn't you? Catherine teased. You seemed quite determined to stay in these parts. I knew a good thing when I saw it. He kissed her softly. Even if that good thing nearly shot me. They laughed together, the ease of long companionship between them. Ryder reached into his pocket and produced a small box. I have something for you, he said. Not as meaningful as your father's gift, perhaps, but... Catherine opened the box to find a delicate gold band set with small diamonds that caught the last rays of the setting sun. Ryder, she breathed. It's beautiful. Thought it was time you had a proper ring, he said. The plain band we used at our wedding was all I could afford then. I've never needed anything fancy, Catherine protested, though her eyes shone with pleasure. I know, but you deserve it. He slipped the ring onto her finger alongside her worn gold wedding band. 25 years, Catherine, the best years of my life. She looked up at him, this man who had changed her world with his quiet strength and unwavering love. And many more to come. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. From strangers to partners, from caution to trust, from friendship to a love that had only deepened with each passing year. The locket that had once been her father's final gift now held miniature portraits of their children alongside those of her parents. The legacy of love had expanded, growing to embrace new generations. Looking back, Catherine could trace the path of their life together to that first rainy day when a patient cowboy had stood at her door, willing to wait until she was ready to open it, not just to a package from her father, but to a future brighter than she had dared to dream. And Ryder, holding his beloved wife in the desert twilight, silently thanked the twist of fate that had led him to her door all those years ago. Every mile he had traveled, every hardship he had endured after the war, had been leading him here to Catherine, to their children, to the home and life they had built together. For a man who had once believed he had lost his capacity for dreams after Gettysburg, the reality of their shared life exceeded anything he could have imagined. The patient waiting, the careful building of trust, the gradual opening of her heart to his all had been worth every moment. As stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, Catherine and Ryder Hayes stood together on the porch where their story had begun, their love a testament to patience, courage, and the power of opening one's door to forever.